Okay, it's 7 o'clock. I think we can get started. Okay, good evening and welcome to tonight's Curious Science Writers webinar, Sunday at 7 webinar, Finding the Heart of Your Story with Miss Anne-Marie Santoro. My name is Varsha Garla and I'm the Curious Science Writers student staff member, and I'm thrilled to act as this evening's moderator. We are grateful to the New Jersey Association for Biomedical Research for hosting tonight's dynamic discussion. But before we get started, please get comfortable with the communications options found in the panel on the right side of your screen. We have muted the audience so you can concentrate on the discussion between Ms. Santoro and myself, but please we encourage you to make the most of this opportunity and type in questions using the chat box to our guest and offer any opinions or questions that you may be having. We are recording this discussion and we'll post it on the Curious Science Writer website shortly, but without further ado, let's get started. Ms. Santoro, good evening and thank you for joining us.
Delighted to be here. Good evening, everybody.
So first, I thought we could get to know you a little bit better. You have quite an impressive and extensive resume. You've done a lot with your career. Specifically, you've worked at the New York's WNET, Channel 13, the Children's Television Workshop, which later became Sesame Street, creating educational media that never existed before. Could you please explain what you did, what drew you to that work, and what your experience was like?
Well, I began my career as an elementary school educator in New York City. And once I got there, I discovered that in order to keep teaching in New York City, I had to have my master's degree within 5 years. So since I was teaching during the day, I decided I needed to do it in something that would keep me up and active. And so I went into communications, specifically television, and at that time radio as well. So that master's degree in communications kind of opened up a whole other world to me. I adored teaching in elementary school, but then all of a sudden I got word that there was this job that was opening at Channel 13, and it seemed to have my name written all over it. And in order to pay for my master's degree, I got a real estate license. And they were looking for someone who was a New York City teacher. They were looking with someone with a recent master's degree in communications. I finished in August, and I heard this in September. And then they were looking with someone who had some selling experience. And I just said I had to get a real estate license, sold 2 houses to pay for my master's degree. And I said, well, what is this job? And it turned out to be a job at Channel 13, teaching teachers how to use over 60 programs that they had on the air at that time, instructional television in the tri-state area. And the year I got there, they had done, the year before I got there, they did 30 workshops in the tri-state area. The year that after I was there 1 year, we had done 300 workshops. So it was kind of a job that if I was, say, a teenager and I knew this job existed, I probably would have said, I want to be that when I grow up. But here's the thing, it didn't exist when I was a teenager. So basically I just kind of followed my instincts. I wanted to teach, I wanted to stay teaching, so I got my master's. And then that master's in communications just opened up this whole world of television. I stayed at Channel 13 for 4 years, and then at the Children's Television Workshop, which is now known as Sesame Place, they were looking for someone to be their school services coordinator for their first science series that they were going to do. It's called 3-2-1 Contact, and it was going to be a national series for 8 to 12-year-olds around the country. And I went and I got that job, and it was an amazing experience. So we did 65 half-hour shows for that age group, and it went on for quite a few years, and I organized the national school and community outreach around that. And then I decided that I really liked this other world of teaching teachers and creating things that don't exist. So I stayed at the Children's Television Workshop for 10 years and became their Director of Educational Programs. And that's really where I learned how to create things that don't exist and enjoy it, and how to bring it out to scale on a national level. It's been a great, great experience.
That's amazing that you were able to use so many different degrees and types of training into one combined career.
Yes, but what I want to say is that, I mean, it was all going from what I really wanted to do, and it all required like taking leaps into the unknown. It's not like I knew how to do what I was supposed to be doing at Channel 13, but my resume was what they wanted, but it was all brand new. So we created things that don't exist. Then at Sesame Street, of course, we're always doing that. And then I got to create not only that science series, but work on a math series called Square One TV, and and all kinds of wonderful programs with the Sesame Street. So, Big Bird was my boss for a decade, and I must say, he was a great boss. And then 27 years ago this month, actually last week, I started my own company called From the Heart Communications.
Mhm.
So I leapt out of Big Bird's nest and decided I wanted to um, help people enter the 21st century with a cherished dream, and to help them find the drive and daring to make those dreams come true. So 27 years later, I'm still doing that work and enjoying that enormously.
So it's described that your company is supposed to make products that nourish the best in the human spirit.
Yes, that's when I wake up in the morning to do that, and I've been so very blessed because, you know, anytime a group of people, profit and nonprofit companies, have come to me, usually when they have a dream about something that they want to reach either students, their teachers, or their parents, and they have the dream, but they're not sure quite how to create it, and then, of course, get it out in the world. And I've been very lucky that somehow my name comes up, and they say, "Well, maybe you should call Anne Marie," and that's where my work begins then. So it all, and once that starts, so the conversation will begin, and I start to pay a great deal of attention to what it is that the folks who are thinking about hiring me really want to do, and I think about what my skills are and how they line up with whatever their dream is. And then we decide to take a leap into the unknown together. Once again, I don't often know everything about whatever it is they want to do, but that's exciting to me. I mean, I need to be learning something at the same time. So I'm very honest about what I know how to do, and very honest about what it is I'm excited about learning about their area of expertise. And
Mhm.
together, we usually get things done out into the world. It's great fun.
So I would love to hear more about how you accomplish this goal of creating new products and also spreading them out to a larger audience. So what I would like to get into is making the material interesting and appealing to a lot of people. And
Right.
in this program, we write articles that are about scientific research. They can be seen as pretty dry at times if they're not presented the right way. So our goal is to tap into their emotions and let them know that this research does affect them and it can have an impact on them. So this translates into letting the audience know how what the research affects humans, how it can change lives, and how it is being conducted by humans as well. So how would you suggest when we're writing these articles that we connect to the reader behind the screen who will be reading our work?
Very good question. Well, first with first with your research, you need to pay deep, deep attention to who's ever doing the research. So if you are getting a chance to interview them, that's one way. If you're reading their work, that's another. Whether you're communicating on the phone, in person, or through emails or text, whatever it is, I mean, you want to keep asking the questions to find the passion that drove that person to want to spend this time and energy and expertise to find an answer to the question. So you want to go to where their question was, what their original what was the original thing that piqued their curiosity, right? And once you get there, you start going down that road. You build your questions through their passion. Try to find where the pulse of the story is, where the heartbeat of the story is. And you'll find it at the beginning through the person who's doing the research, right? And then after that, then you have to start to reflect on what you've heard and begin to see where this is landing inside you. So then your questions are going to get more personal. The minute you'll be able to write it in a way that will excite other people if you feel that yourself. I mean, you have to keep asking the questions until you're on fire, really, with it. You know. And then there's this piece, and this you only get by continually doing the research and doing the writing, is to do it in your authentic voice. I mean, to tell the story not only through the eyes and the imagination and the hearts of the person who you're studying, but through your, then you have to translate that into your authentic voice and know your audience of who you're trying to reach. And in this case, I think your audience is just about everybody. Is that right? You want to reach all ages, right?
Yes.
So the idea is to find the key message. Now, here's something that I learned at Sesame Street, and it kind of informs everything that I do. I mean, I would assume everybody listening knows what Sesame Street is, but when it was designed at the beginning, they researched absolutely every segment with the audience. At that time, it was like 3, 4, and 5-year-olds only. Before they put it on the air. So if they were trying to teach the number 8 in an animation, well, that animation would be shown to those kids before it was put on the air. And if it didn't work, then they would tweak it until it did work. Or if they were trying to teach the letter L, you know, in a live action segment, well, the kids would see it in these focus groups, and then they would change it. So it was always trying to get the most efficient way to get the message out. Because the woman who created it was a woman by the name of Joan Gans Cooney, and she happened to notice that preschoolers were paying more attention to the commercials on television than they were to the shows. And there turned out to be reasons for that. The commercials then and even now are louder on television than the regular show. So if you're running around as a toddler, of course it's going to draw your attention. But then she started to notice that the people who were being hired to do these commercials were the very, very best in the business, right? So that they were being paid to take the letter L and sell it to this age group, you know, in 30 seconds or 60 seconds or a minute and a half or something like that. So they used the techniques of commercial television to start to teach preschoolers their number and letter skills. That's all it was at the beginning. Now, of course, the curriculum is, you know, is probably, I would imagine, hundreds of pages long because they teach a lot more than that. So for all of you out there, I mean, you want to find the core message, right? And I was just saying to you before that the Super Bowl this year, if you tried to sell a product on the Super Bowl and you wanted a 30-second spot, you had to pay $5 million for that 30-second spot. So you know that message was going to be done by the very, very best people. And no matter what it was, the product or the issue they were trying to promote was going to be done in a way that the visual and the sounds, the music or sound effects, and the words would all come together in a way that's going to grab the 114 million people who happen to watch in February of this year. So in a lot of ways, I'm kind of recommending that as you're doing your research, you're going to listen for that key message, and then you're going to find the visuals as well as the words, you know, to make that happen, to get to your audience.
So what I'm hearing, how this could potentially translate to us as student writers, is that when these people working at Sesame Street would do trials with an audience, right? They would
Yeah.
right, they would literally try it out to see if it would work.
Right.
How I see this translating to us writers is that we could possibly, when we have our drafts written out, test them out on people we know or strangers. Very.
Exactly. Exactly. You do want to test them. Now, when you do that, you want to go to the people in your life that are, I would call them tender listeners. You know who they are. You don't want to be sharing your work because you're vulnerable in sharing your work. And I think there's an enormous amount of courage in being a writer, any kind of a writer, no matter what it is. You're still putting your time and your imagination, your heart in it. So whoever you're choosing to share it with, it's not like you're not looking for criticism, but you want it if you want a very tender response. In other words, they can tell you what's working and what's not working, but you want to do it with somebody who's not going to make you crash and feel like you can't go back in and do the next edit. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I choose carefully. Yes, I think you should absolutely do that, but choose carefully and let them know, what your purpose is and who your audience is and what you're looking for. And maybe you get that by just asking them questions afterwards. Maybe that would be the better way of doing it. Let them read it, and then maybe you ask them some questions and see what actually landed somewhere in there. We're living in a moment of time where there's so much going on, so much coming in. We carry computers in our pockets. There's YouTube, there's text. I mean, there's so much that to grab the attention of an audience is probably more difficult today than ever. However, many people are doing it, right? I mean, things go viral on YouTube like that. What is it? Maybe looking at some of those things that go viral very, very quickly, looking at those YouTube videos, there's a lot to be learned there. Like, what was it? Was it the message? Was it the deliverer of the message? Was it the moment in time that it came out? Um, who knows? Who knows?
I think it really is a combination of all of those things. You're
Right,
totally correct. I mean, in this day and age, we have so many stimuli
right,
constantly thrown our direction.
right,
But what I was able to glean from what you said earlier, too, about the whole Super Bowl, and they're getting literally 2 minutes of airtime, it has to be the best quality that they're putting out for
very
the
good.
money that they're spending. So what I think between this YouTube age and the digital age, catching people's audience, I mean their attention, sorry, also has a lot to do with the quality of our content. And like you said, it's all about having a very specific message and not being all over the place.
Right, and your titles are important
Mm-hmm.
because that's what's going to grab. Because everyone is so busy, that title is kind of important. So I know sometimes when I'm writing and I'm finishing a piece, I usually find that the end of the piece is really what it needs to be at the beginning of the piece.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes I'm working it out myself, and you're working, 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 and it's like, aha, there it is. That's the piece. Because I get to the aha moment maybe at the end, but in today's culture, I think you got to grab that aha moment and either get it somewhere in your title or in your first few sentences. So that's really all the time you have to grab someone's attention. You know, that's another job now. You have to do that. You can't assume that people are going to be reading your entire article, but we want that to happen. And I think you grab them through anecdotes as well. So the person that you're doing the research on, try to get some anecdotes out of them. What fell out of the sky into their imagination to get them to want to even do this research. Tell that story.
Mm-hmm.
You're communicating to human beings, so you want to tell the story through what we all care about. So for me, it's always to tell the truth, which with as much passion, as much beauty as you can. You know, tell it from your point of view. I think that our writing voices are as specific to each one of us as our fingerprints. You know, There's only your fingerprint is exclusive to you. I think when you do find your writing voice, that also becomes just you. Nobody can tell a story the way you can. Everyone is going to maybe have a similar experience, but not everyone is going to express it the same way. And that's what keeps the world moving around the way it is. And the only way you get there is to keep writing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's no way out of it. And for me, the essence of it is to pay attention. Pay attention to everything that's going on around us, to take some time to reflect on what that is and what it feels like, and then take some time to write it down. And usually, the great work usually has many drafts are involved. So don't feel as though if you're on your third or fourth draft that, oh, I wish I could do this quicker. No, you're kind of polishing it, as a diamond, until it's at its point of essence. And once again, that goes back to the heart of the story. And for me, that's the pulse, the heartbeat. It's the pulse of the story. You want to get that to be very, very strong for you, and then you'll be able to get it out there, I think, to others in the world.
I really like how you mentioned the idea of subjectivity and how we can all experience the same thing, but it could mean something so different to all of us. But what I want to ask you about is how do we become more articulate in describing our reactions and our experiences? Do you encourage reading others? Do you encourage um, writing conversationally at first? What are your ideas to becoming more articulate and getting your message across more efficiently and authentically?
Well, I do. I mean, everyone seems to say that the best writers are the people who read the most. Do you know what I mean? The more you read and pay attention to what you're reading. There may be, you may have hundreds of books on your bookshelf, right? But then there'll be these 5 or 10 books that you would pack with you and move them anywhere. And there are reasons why those 5 or 10 books jumped into your soul at some point. You want to analyze those books. You want to analyze what happened to you. What is it about that author and that story? Why is it still with you? If you read it at one age and now at this age, it's still important to you. I usually find that with poetry quite a lot. Like there could be a poem from my 20s that if I go back to it now, still will sear me in a very deep way. And then there might be another one I go back to and I think, what was that? Who was I then? Who was that girl, who thought this was the be-all, end-all and shared it with all her friends, like, oh, you got to. So I think you do want to pay attention to the authors that deeply, deeply move you. And if there's a passage or a chapter that really got to you, well then stop, go back and read it again, because now you're a writer too, and you want to try to reflect on, well, what was it that he or she did that just made you want to drop to your feet and say, I want to do that. I want to do that. I want to know how she did that. And so it's about that, paying attention to the writers that you love, and then really kind of reflecting on why you love them and what is their craft. And there's so many great ones around, not just in science, but in fiction and nonfiction. It doesn't matter what you're reading, but if it's landing, and you could read tomorrow, you could wake up and read an article in the newspaper or on a digital magazine, and you may find yourself weeping. Well, that's the time to stop and say, what's going on? Why is this touching me so deeply? Those are your clues to what moves you, and then your voice will move from there. And then as you're doing your research, you're paying attention to what moves you deeply, and that's what you want to write about in order to reach the largest audience with whatever the main message is. And you have to get to the essence of the message. That takes time, that takes work, takes paying attention. It all goes back to that. but it's a lot of fun. It's a journey. It's a great journey. It nourishes you, right?
Mm.
I always say you want to stay around the people and the experiences that give you energy. Stay away from those that drain the energy out of your body. You know who they are, and you know what those experiences are. So, you know, and that's where the joy is. And I always like to think about whenever I'm teaching things around the power of story, it's always for me is to get to that place of experiencing your words, your ideas, your thoughts absolutely landing in someone else's heart and imagination. And when you find that, when you get some feedback about that and you feel that joy of connection, you never want to stop writing. You just always want to be there. You know. Now, if we can get that to happen around science, I mean, we'll all become more literate around these issues that are affecting everybody on the planet in very big ways. And so we really need you, curious science writers.
So a big theme that I'm getting from you is the idea that introspection makes a really good writer, whether it's thinking about how the subject matter makes you feel, how you react to it, how you react to other authors' works,
Mm-hmm.
and just reflecting deeply on what you're trying to communicate.
Right.
That's the main idea.
Yes, and try to get to the message, get to the main, for instance, so, you know, everyone is familiar with movie posters, right? And on movies posters, you'll have the title of the movie, then you'll usually have something called a log line or a tagline, which basically is trying to say in as few words as possible something to get people to come in to see the film, right? If they're not watching it, a trailer. Well, that's the key. That's the key. You got to think of what your log line is to your story. You know, what's that essence of it? Like remember the I don't you probably most people are familiar with the movie Rocky
Right.
with still Sylvester Stallone, and now of course there may be 7 Rockies. But the original tagline was his was a million to one shot, something like that.
Mm.
And you could look these things up, the taglines to movies, and you could start to see that that's an art in itself, just writing that. Just like these 30-second commercials for a Super Bowl, you can imagine every second is thought about. If you're paying $5 million for 30 seconds to sell a thought, an idea, to get someone to take an action, to buy a product, to go to the store, to whatever it is you want them to do, so you may want to look at some of those on YouTube. There are plenty of these, the best of the Super Bowl, say, and you watched 5 or 6 of them, and really think about the words and the images and what they're trying to sell, and that could be kind of an interesting exercise. Like if you're at a point in your writing where we all have these highs and lows in our writing where you need to be lifted up. Well, then go look at a few, because that's great storytelling in 30 seconds.
Mm.
You know, you can use that commercial technique in this realm of communicating science concepts in a way that people are going to want to tell their friends about and pass the article around, or maybe take action in their community, because that's really what we need. Write a letter to a senator, to the president, whoever. You need people to start to take action. It seems to me we have some huge issues, as they say.
So more than any anything our writing can do, our hooks need to be on point,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And that deals with not only the titles and the visuals that pop up randomly in a concise form, but also like the first few sentences and words of
Yes.
articles. So what do you think makes a really good title or image, just in general, first impression on a reader?
Well, I find there are many. For
Mhm.
me, my favorite is like if you think of an unlikely combination, that usually gets people's attention.
Mhm.
Like, and I'll go back to my Sesame Street experience. When I first got there, they were doing a project. When I heard about this project, I said to myself, I would have loved to have been involved in a project like that. And the title of the project was Big Bird Goes to Prison. Unlikely combination, right? You don't think about a 7-foot canary and Sesame Street and people in prison, right? Big Bird Goes to Prison. It was a brilliant, brilliant project that won the International JC Award as being the best project for children on the planet, when it went out. Because what it did was it got inmates in prisons who hadn't committed murder or rape to start to study early childhood education, get their AA degrees, and set up Sesame Street viewing centers in prisons so that when families came to visit who was ever in prison, if they had children, either the adults had time to have time together, to have some adult conversation, and their kids could be in this viewing room with these inmates who had been trained to read to them, to play games with them, to teach them some things. Or the parents could then go into these little rooms and actually have like a wonderful experience with their children instead of being in a big room surrounded by a lot of people who are all talking at the same time, which is not so great for if you're 3 or 4 or 5 or 10, right?
Yeah.
So unlikely combinations, I find, have great power. You know, I was able to go on and create something called the Sesame Street Fire Safety Project, where we taught preschoolers what to do in case of a fire. We did it on the air, but we also did it through working with fire departments around the country. And happy to say that we know of a few lives that have been saved because of the messages that got out through there. So, yeah, there's great power to these things. You can save lives. There's no question about it.
Right, and that's our goal when we're communicating the research being done in our stories. We want it to be more knowledge that the public has on the workings that people are doing behind closed doors that they wouldn't know about otherwise. So one thing you mentioned was having contrast in a title that can just is something shocking.
Well,
Um,
unlikely combination. Yes, something that's like, well, oh, whoa. You want to
right.
get. And when you're writing your story, you got to think about it almost as a screenplay. Think about the person who you're studying and think about their passion for what they're trying to get out in the world and think about yourself as being the person who's going to help them do that. Sometimes they need the help too
Hmm.
to get funding and all kinds of things.
Right.
Yeah. So it's a
Okay.
big job, but I
Yeah.
know you're all up to it.
I would like to hear from our viewers their favorite hooks, whether they're
Yeah,
questions.
that'd be great. Let's hear from you.
Yeah. So as we keep talking, please use the chat box to type in your favorite hooks, techniques. Um, so I would like to go more into the visuals that you mentioned because as much as titles and words are important, images and sounds can also, you know, they can speak 1,000 words.
Yeah.
Um, and you mentioned that Sesame Street uses commercial techniques, which is very loud sounds and bright images. So how would this translate to images that support an article?
Wow. Well, you have to think about the images in your life. Look around your room, see what images you have in your own room, what moves you. And you have to understand what a great image is. And once again, it goes back to point of view.
Mm-hmm.
So um, either you're going to get these images from whoever it is that you're doing your research on, or you're going to take the images yourself. What happens? Either one? Is that how that works? I'm asking.
Oh, in our program, we have a team who
You have
makes,
a team.
yeah,
Okay.
we custom make all of our graphics.
Oh, the team makes your graphics. I
Right.
see. I see. So that means that. So then you have to feed your team. So you have to convince your team of the message before you even have to convince the world at large, right? Is that
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So there we go again. Um, once again, um, powerful images. I mean, I have many in my own life. I mean, you'll have to give me some examples. I'm just saying, you know a great image when you see it, right? Usually, there's something called the rule of thirds. You know what the rule of thirds is?
Right.
Yeah. All right. So usually in the rule of thirds, so you want whatever it is you want your audience to focus on to be in one of those tic-tac-toe, those boxes there. So you want to be sure that you're taking care of that rule of thirds thing. That's a very, very powerful tool. Nobody quite knows why it works,
Mm.
uh, but apparently the pulse of the photo is in one of those points in an image. So whatever image your graphic people are pulling up, make sure the rule of thirds is at play. Um, do you ever take photographs yourselves? I mean, how's that work?
As far as I know, and someone can correct me, we make them. They're usually animated.
Oh, animated, great. So we're talking about moving visuals.
Not moving in the sense, but more like digitally created. They're not photographs.
Oh, okay. Is there a
Right.
reason not to use photographs?
I don't think so. I
Oh,
mean, we like to make them ourselves.
yeah. Well, that's good. You can make photographs. Yeah, 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 yeah. That's very exciting to be able to do both. You know, you get the words, you want to put the visuals together. I mean, and all our cameras take movies, so there's no reason, not to have a little clip of someone speaking, even if it's the writer, you know, telling an anecdote of what happened to them while they were doing this research. You want to humanize it as much as possible. Very exciting. Gives you a lot more work. So now you have the printed, you have the words, you have a still image, and you have moving images to work with, and and all of it in service of finding the heart of the story through your own heart.
So I think the most important part that you keep mentioning is figuring out how the material that we're writing about affects us.
Yeah, and so instead of saying figuring out, I'd say feel it out. So when you're writing, your head is going to be involved. So you'll get your thinking done. But in order to get into the story, you got to feel it. You really got to go in. You got to go into the story with your heart, and then you can write it with your imagination and your heart connected. So then you got something that's going to be very alive. Because you're really enlivened by it. Does the story nourish you? Does it give you energy? It's not ready to go out unless it does that, I would suggest.
Hmm. I think that's really empowering. Just writing honestly
Yeah.
and authentically. I mean, it seems effortless, though of course it's not.
Well,
But
it'll look effortless at the end if you put the time in and you do it this way. It
yeah,
will take time, and it won't be your first or second draft, but you'll see the drafts getting better and better. And drafts are so much easier now with our digital tools, so it's not such a big deal. But it is fun to keep track of your drafts. So I draft one, either through dates or whatever, because it is kind of fun to see how many it takes and also to see the difference between the first and the last. And it's always about the energy in there, yeah. Because there's so much coming at us. We got to go for the very best. So go for whatever nourishes you, and then you'll be able to nourish your audience for sure.
I think especially with writing about scientific research,
Mm-hmm.
um, like writing honestly from your own point of view can add like that human element that's very appealing to an
Yeah,
audience.
Right. It is. Tell the story with as much truth and beauty that you have in you at that moment in time. Once you've done that, you've known you've done the best you can do. Now, your next story, you'll be at a different place because of your experience. You do get better the more you do it.
Hmm.
Just like learning a language. If you don't use the language, it's almost every time you speak it, you feel like you're starting all over again. Or learning a new program on your computer, especially a visual one. There's so many details involved. If you do it every day, of course, then you get very skilled and you get very fast. But if you're not, then you feel like you're always going back and relearning it. You do it faster, but you really want to keep writing. And you want to write for yourself as well. I mean, you need to get up in the morning and do some writing. Just do some free form writing just to get yourself warmed up. And then jump into your, the work you're doing around this extraordinarily wonderful program.
I think that's great advice because we don't often hear that, writing, which is really an art form of the mind, requires daily practice. We don't hear that a lot.
Yeah, it really does. It really does. And then you feel better about it too. And it's a great thing when you start to think about yourself as a writer. And I do want to bring up the courage piece again because, all right, there is courage in putting your work out into the world. So I always think it's important to practice your courage. So every article you write and put out in the world, you get braver, especially if you're coming from that place of truth and beauty, okay? So you know that you did the very best you could. So no matter what people are saying or reacting to your article, it doesn't really matter. For your life in this moment in time, that was it. That was great. Next round, maybe it'll even be better. But that's okay. That's your journey. And of course, the journey is life itself. So you want to enjoy this process. Have some fun with it. Enjoy it, enjoy it, enjoy it. Yeah. It's a great thing you're doing.
As far as the revision process goes, you mentioned that we can get through a lot of drafts.
Yes.
What lens should we be looking at besides just, um, technique and grammar, the craft of it? What lens should we be looking at our pieces when we're reading them? Like, should we read them from a reader's perspective, how it would impact them? What do you suggest when we're revising?
That might be where, we were talking earlier about, choosing some tender readers and listeners to take a look at your stuff. I think that might be the place. Like, be in the room when they're reading it if that's possible. That's kind of an interesting thing to do. Watch their body language as they're reading. Where your paragraphs are. You might know where that one sentence that you weren't sure really worked is, and you'll watch them. I mean, I've done that. And then you kind of breathe a little better after they get past there, because you then ask them some questions. I mean, I would use those tender listeners to be sure that the one message that you really wanted them to get, they got, and that they enjoyed the experience. At this point, because everyone is kind of early in this phase of becoming these science writers, I think that probably would be your best bet, as opposed to you keep, maybe you don't show them your first draft. I mean, I don't ever recommend that, but when you think you're ready, you know, definitely show some tender readers and listeners, and that would be lovely. That should be quite a lovely experience for you. And once again, it's just going to is there a heartbeat in your story? Did you find the heartbeat in the story, and were you able to communicate it so other people feel it too? People are hungry for this. People want to understand these big science projects. We have so many exciting ones going on around the planet right now. I mean, whew. So I think people are ready. You have an audience that's ready to receive your work, and this is just the beginning. Many of you will go on to make major careers in this, and who knows where those careers will lead. I never imagined I was going to have my own business for 27 years, but I kind of followed my instinct and my heart and just kept leaping into the unknown. And that turned out to be like scary and absolutely wonderful at the same time. So I encourage you all to do that too. You don't know where this will lead, but I know it's going to lead somewhere really beautiful. So have a good time with all this.
Definitely. I think you keep telling us to have fun.
Yes.
It's really important.
It's really important. Yeah, I know this is serious stuff, but you want to enjoy the process of communicating in a way that people understand. I mean, that's where the joy is going to come for you. And you will get better and better and better at it the more you do it. You just feel these new sections of your brain lighting up, as you understand this stuff better too. So it's all good. The whole journey should be just great fun for everybody. So I hope I get a chance to read some of this work that you'll be producing, and I wish you all a very, very great journey. If you have any questions, I'm very happy to try to answer them.
Of course, we'll let our audience know your email address so they can be in touch with you.
Okay, that'd be great.
Definitely. But thank you so much. I think you taught us really great lessons about having fun, being authentic, and taking the time to think about what we're writing and how to present it. I think that's
You're very welcome. It's wonderful to spend this time with all of you. Thank you so much, Varsha.
thank you.
Take care.
So with that, I want to close up. So again, thank you so much.
Well,
We'll let Ms. Santoro's contact information out with everyone. So if you didn't get to share your questions with her, you can later. We encourage everyone to recording again later and reference it to learn all of the lessons all over again. But finally, have a good night, everyone, and good luck with your story writing. We hope that you were able to take away something valuable from this conversation. And again, thank you so much, Ms. Santoro, for your time
okay.
and insight.
Take care.
All right. Good night, everyone.